In this mini lecture, we'll look at Chapter 15 on managing communication. Here are the learning outcomes for this chapter. You may pause here to review them if you like. We're going to start out by looking at a basic model of communication. So in communication, we have a sender and we have a receiver. The sender has something they want to convey, a message they want to convey. They then need to encode that message, meaning they need to figure out a way to communicate that, either by figuring out what they're going to say or what they're going to write or what nonverbal actions they're going to take to encode a message. They then transmit that message through some communication channel, written, verbal, maybe it's a video or whatever it might be. The receiver then receives the information and then they have to decode that message. And basically what they do is they have to try to make sense of what the message said. And then the message is either understood or it's not, and they send feedback to the sender. And at the same time, you have all kinds of noise going on in the background, literal noise, distractions, etc., that can impact effective communication. So on this slide, I have found communication skills that are important in the workplace. Those include the clarity of your message, making sure people understand what you said, taking turns to communicate, active listening, choosing the right way to communicate, having self-awareness, and appropriate body language. So one piece of communication that's important is perception, and this is how individuals attend to, organize, interpret, and retain information. And so we have different filters, such as our personality, psychology, our experiences, and these all influence how we pay attention to or choose not to pay attention to our messages. And so you can see that not only do we have to pay attention, we also have to organize that information. We have to interpret it and make sense of it, and then we have to retain it. And all these impact our perceptions. So some perception issues that may occur include selective perception. And this is a really common thing. It's just part of who we are. And it's the tendency for us to notice and accept objects and information that go along with our own values, beliefs, and expectations. And at the same time, we ignore or screen information that's inconsistent with our values, beliefs, and expectations. And this is a major contributor to misunderstandings and miscommunications. And then there's closure. And this is the tendency to fill in gaps of missing information by assuming what we don't know is consistent with what we already know. So, for example, if somebody leaves the company and you don't know why, you might say, oh, did you hear so-and-so is leaving the company? I bet that they are going to a new company because they're getting paid more. We're just making that assumption. That's that closure. We're trying to make sense of it and fill in those missing gaps. And so again, in my example, you can see that I don't know the truth behind that statement, and that inaccurate information can create problems in an organization. All right, and so attribution theory is similar in this, and it says that people have a basic understanding to understand and explain people's behaviors. All right, internal attribution is behavior is thought to be voluntary and under the control of the individual, and external attribution assumes that behavior is thought to be involuntary and outside of the control of the individual. Your book also talks about defensive bias and fundamental attribution theory. And so defensive bias is the tendency for people to perceive themselves as personally and situationally similar to someone who's having difficulty or trouble. And then fundamental attribution error is the tendency to ignore external causes of behavior and attribute issues to other people's actions. So in this example, we have a coworker who says, how can they expect us to make sales if they don't have hot selling inventory in stock? We can't sell what's not here. You also have an employee that says, that's the third sale I've lost this week because company management doesn't keep enough inventory in stock. I can't sell it if we don't have it. And then you have, and so those are defensive bias. And then we have the boss who has fundamental attribution error saying that that new employee isn't good. I may have to get rid of them because sales aren't good, or I have to get rid of them if sales don't improve. And so you can see the employers are saying, hey, we don't have inventory, and the boss is saying, my employees don't know how to sell. And so we have these communication issues where maybe it's both. Who knows? There's also self-serving bias. This is the tendency to overestimate our value, where we give ourselves credit for successes and we blame others or external causes for failures. And so here you have an example. It says, yay, an A+, I'm so smart. And then you have an F. I got an F. Oh, she doesn't like me, right? And I think we've all done this, where we take credit for positive events and blame external factors on negative events. Right? So there's different types of communication channels. So formal communication channels include downward communication, upward communication, and horizontal communication. So upward, let's start with downward. Downward communication, I think we're all very familiar with. It starts with the higher levels in an organization and works its way down the organizational structure. Horizontal communication is communication across the same level, so manager to manager or staff to a staff. And upward communication is when you have the lower levels of the organization communicating upwards to the top of the organization. So in this example, you'd have your staff communicating to your manager, communicating to the president. And all of these communication channels are very important. I was working on a strategic plan, and we were finding that downward communication was really good about the strategic plan. Horizontal communication was really good, but we needed upward communication to help to determine whether the strategic plan was being implemented and if there were any issues in implementing it. And so we had to put some things in place to help with that upward communication. There are also informal communication channels. You might hear this as water cooler talk or the grapevine. And this is just the transmission of messages from employee to employee outside of formal communication channels. And studies have shown that the grapevine or this water cooler talk are really accurate sources of information because they typically have interesting and timely information, which spreads fast. Information is spread face to face and allows people to send and receive feedback, increasing the accuracy of the communication. And actually, a lot of company information moves along the grapevine rather than through formal communication channels. And people fact checked it by verifying it with others. So it's really important to understand these informal communication channels within the workplace. I know I have worked with one person in particular who says, I hear that there's a rumor going around. I just want you to know that that's not true. And so this person in a pretty high level of the organization will just squash the rumors right away or confirm them if they are true. All right. There's different other types. We also have one-on-one communication. So in the workplace, we can use coaching where we communicate with someone in order to improve their job performance. And then there's also counseling where you communicate with someone about non-job related issues. And so, for example, you may have a mentor or coaching within the workplace, and then you might also have like an employee assistance program with counseling to help people deal with their personal things so that they can be more productive in the workplace. There's also nonverbal communication. These include things like your movements of your body, your facial expressions, the pitch, the rate, the tone, the volume, and speaking patterns of your voice. Those all play into our nonverbal communication. It's also important to choose the right type of communication, whether it's oral, whether it's written, and there's all kinds of different ways. You can have oral communication through telephone, video conferencing. I have one person who sends me voice memos sometimes. And then you have written communication, letters, emails, messaging, text messages. And it's important to choose the right communication medium at the right time. Listening is also very important, and being an active listener. So not just hearing and not just listening, but actively listening and providing feedback. And then empathetic listening, where you are trying to understand the person's perspective and their frame of reference, and giving feedback that shows that you understand what they're saying. A lot of employers are looking for active listeners and people who have empathy. And so some active listening skills include building trust, establishing rapport, demonstrating concern, asking questions, and using brief verbal affirmations like, yep, I see or I understand. It's also important to use constructive feedback versus destructive. So an example of destructive feedback is you did not do well on the last exam. That's not really telling you anything other that you didn't already know. A more constructive approach would be to say something like, I noticed your grade on the last exam was not as high as your usual scores, and it appears you had some problems with the concepts in Chapter 7. However, you did well on the questions relating to the other chapters. Is there anything I can do to help you better grasp those concepts in Chapter 7? That's constructive. Now we can actually dive into what the issue on the exam was. Sometimes organizational silence occurs, and this is when employees withhold information about issues or problems within the organization. And this can happen because they have a fear of punishment, they don't think management will do anything, they think someone else will fix it. But we need to overcome this organizational silence, and so we can do that through hotlines, surveys, anonymous tips, anonymous feedback, monitoring social media, monitoring blogs, allowing for meetings where you can gather feedback. It's really important to have those various forms of communication, that downward, that horizontal, and that upward, and organizational silence inhibits those. So we want to overcome them. So that's chapter 15. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.